May 21st, 1998, when Jacob Riker, who was already wounded by a gunshot, charged at a shooter without fear, the tables turned within seconds. Armed and dangerous, the shooter thought he had control until Jacob proved he was anything but an easy target. These are 7 school shooters who messed with the wrong person. Starting with Aaron Ibarra.
Mies, a 22-year-old senior at the time, dashes out in bare feet and pepper sprays him right in the face, wresting the gun from Ibarra's hand.
June 5th, 2014, in Seattle Pacific University, the afternoon sun cast long shadows over the quiet campus. Inside Otto Miller Hall, students laughed and studied before summer break. To many, the sudden appearance of a young man carrying a shotgun seemed surreal, like a prank, a bad joke to mark the end of the school year. But the illusion was destroyed in an instant. The man was 27-year-old Aaron Ibarra, and he wasn't joking. Ibarra had spent months planning this moment. Underneath a surface of quiet isolation, his mind was damaged after he was diagnosed with obsessive-compulsive disorder and transient psychosis. He soon became fixated on the Columbine shooting, claiming he heard the voice of Eric Harris, one of the perpetrators, urging him on. Ibarra believed he was chosen by God to send a message, to become a dark symbol of punishment. That day, he arrived in a white pickup truck. In his possession, a Browning over-under shotgun, a hunting knife, and extra shells. He had already scoped out the school earlier, convincing 2 students to give him a private tour. So he used that opportunity to map possible escape routes, not for himself, but for his future victims. As he walked onto campus, he spotted 19-year-old Paul Lee. Without a word, he revealed his shotgun. Lee didn't panic or flinch, and in that moment, Ibarra made a chilling decision by pulling the trigger. The blast struck Paul Lee in the back of the head, killing him instantly. Shrapnel tore into Thomas Fowler, standing nearby. However, Ibarra turned to another student standing a few feet away and fired again. The gun jammed, and she ran. Fate had given her a few precious seconds, and luckily for her, it was enough. Reloading his gun, Ibarra pushed into Otto Miller Hall. Inside, he found Tristan Cooper Roth seated at a table. With his gun leveled, Ibarra told him flatly that he had just murdered someone for disrespecting him. So Cooper Roth sat paralyzed, believing this was his final moment. Then, they heard footsteps as Sarah Williams appeared on the stairs. Ibarra turned and fired, but the shot tore into her upper torso. Meanwhile, Cooper Roth saw a sliver of hope and ran. Ibarra turned the gun on him and pulled the trigger, but again, it misfired. And in that fragile moment between reloads, someone decided enough was enough. John Mies, a student and volunteer safety monitor, had been nearby. He saw the shooter fumble with his weapon and made his move. John pulled a small can of pepper spray from his backpack and charged, a sharp blast to Ibarra's face as he blinded him. And then John tackled him with full force, slamming him to the ground. Ibarra thrashed, reaching for the knife strapped to his waist, but John was faster. He kicked the blade away and pinned him down. As police sirens wailed in the distance, 911 calls flooding the system, John held Ibarra down until officers arrived. Aaron Ibarra was charged with first-degree murder for the killing of Paul Lee, as well as multiple counts of attempted murder and assault. During the trial, his defense attempted to argue that Ibarra's mental illness rendered him not guilty by reason of insanity. Psychiatrists testified about his history of obsessive-compulsive disorder, psychotic episodes, and delusions, particularly his obsession with the Columbine shooters. After a lengthy trial, the jury found Aaron Ibarra guilty. In January 2020, he was sentenced to 112 years in prison, a sentence designed to ensure he would never again walk free. But this horrible act is nothing compared to the next. Kendrick Castillo, Brendan Biley, Joshua Jones.
One of the students who helped end the Colorado school shooting is calling the attackers cowards and praising a friend who died confronting one of them.
Students like Brendan Biley already had the shooters pinned to the ground.
What I thought I'd be able to do in a situation like that was the reality of what I did.
The brave teen helped subdue one of the 2 suspects in Tuesday's shooting at STEM School Highlands Ranch.
May 7, 2019 in STEM School Highlands Ranch, Colorado. It began like any ordinary school day. Students walked the halls, teachers prepared their lessons, and the buzz of teenage noises filled the classrooms. But by the end of the day, that ordinary peace was replaced by the sound of gunfire, screams, and the courage of a few who stood when others fled. 2 shooters, Devin Erickson and Alec McKinney, stepped into campus with one goal in mind: massacre. They came armed and ready. Erickson carried a 9mm Glock handgun, compact, concealable, and deadly. McKinney held a Winchester 12-gauge pump-action shotgun, a weapon capable of causing immense destruction with each pull of the trigger. With faces marked by eerie theatrical makeup, they moved through the school like a scene out of a nightmare. The first shots rang out, jolting the school into panic. Bullets tore through walls, desks, and bodies. Students scrambled for cover. Teachers shielded their classes. The school had become a war zone. But what the shooters didn't expect was resistance. In room 107, 18-year-old Kendrick Castillo didn't think twice. As Erickson raised his weapon, Kendrick rose from his seat and charged. No hesitation, no fear, just instinct to protect. Kendrick collided with the shooter, trying to wrestle the weapon from his hands. But before he could disarm him, a shot rang out, striking Kendrick in the chest. He fell, but in that moment, he bought his classmates time. Precious seconds that would change everything. Inspired by Kendrick's selfless act, 2 more students sprang into action. Brendan Bealey, a strong, focused teen with dreams of becoming a U.S. Marine, joined the fight. Without thinking of the danger, he tackled Erickson head-on, knocking him off balance, grappling for control.
What I thought I'd be able to do in a situation like that was the reality of what I did.
The brave teen helped subdue one of the 2 suspects in Tuesday's shooting at STEM School Highlands Ranch.
Right beside him was Joshua Jones, who threw himself into the struggle. As the chaos unfolded, Erickson managed to fire again, hitting Jones twice, once in the hip, once in the leg. But adrenaline overpowered pain. Jones didn't even realize he had been shot until the fight was over.
Jones said that he did not realize he had been shot until the gunman was on the ground.
Together, the 2 young men overpowered Erickson, pinning him to the floor, prying the weapon from his grip. When police arrived, they were stunned to see that 2 students had already subdued one of the gunmen. The scene they walked into was tragic. Kendrick Castillo was gone, but his final act had saved many. 8 others were wounded, some critically. In February 2020, Alec McKinney pleaded guilty to 17 charges, including first-degree murder and attempted murder. At sentencing, he faced the families of his victims. The judge, acknowledging both his age and the weight of his crimes, sentenced McKinney to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 40 years, plus an additional 38 years for the attempted murders and other charges. Angel Granados Diaz.
First thing I see is him open his jacket and him pull a big gun out of it. All the kids just start screaming.
May 17th, 2019, in Parkrose High School, Portland, Oregon. It was just before noon on an otherwise ordinary Friday. The kind of day students dream through, counting down hours to the weekend. But just down the corridor, an 18-year-old student named Angel Granados Diaz walked silently with a shotgun hidden under his jacket. 1 round, 1 plan, and a heart full of pain. He stepped into a classroom, pulled out the weapon, and panic exploded. Students screamed and teenagers sprinted toward the exits, fleeing for their lives. But not everyone ran. Standing near the door was Keenan Lowe, a former star wide receiver for the Oregon Ducks, now Parkrose High's football coach and security officer. To his players, he was a mentor. To students, a role model. But that day, he was something much more. As the barrel of the shotgun came into view, Lowe didn't hesitate, hands locked on cold steel as the 2 wrestled for control. Lowe fought with everything he had, prying the weapon from Angel's hands. Finally, with a surge of strength, he wrenched it free and handed it off to another teacher. But it wasn't over. What came next wasn't rage. It was something few would expect. Lowe looked into the eyes of a trembling, broken young man and saw not a killer, but someone in pain. And so he wrapped his arms around him and hugged him. Surveillance footage later revealed the moment. Angel, disarmed and overwhelmed, leaning into the embrace while crying. The truth soon emerged. Angel never intended to harm his classmates. That single shotgun round was meant for himself. In his pocket, police found a note. His jacket held a shell with the date, a suicide, planned in silence. But that day, because of one man's courage and compassion, it didn't end in tragedy. Angel was sentenced to 3 years of probation and began receiving the mental health treatment he desperately needed. Eli Serna.
I interrupted his plans the moment I stepped in. If it had been 5 minutes later, he would have stepped out and shot people in the hallway.
January 20th, 2017, in West Liberty-Salem High School, Ohio. It started like any other cold winter morning in a small Ohio town. 16-year-old Logan Cole walked into school, books in hand, mind on the little things, homework, classes, friends. Just before first period, he slipped into the boys' restroom to check his hair in the mirror. Inside the restroom was another student, 17 years old Eli Serna. But that morning, he was anything but ordinary. Hidden in his bag was a loaded shotgun, and behind his calm behavior was depression, isolation, pain. That day, it had reached its breaking point. Ely had chosen this bathroom as his staging ground, a place to quietly assemble his weapon before unleashing a nightmare on his classmates. Then Logan walked in. For a moment, everything froze. Two teenagers, one with a gun, one with no idea what was coming. Then the shotgun was raised, and Logan was hit, once in the chest, again in the back. He dropped to the floor in blinding pain, over 200 shotgun pellets tearing through his body. His tooth shattered on impact with the floor. But what came next, no one could have predicted. Through the pain and the fear, Logan spoke calm, steady words meant to reach through the darkness. He looked up at Ely and told him something that would change everything. You don't have to do this. You haven't hurt anyone else. You can still stop, and for reasons no one may ever fully understand. It worked. Ely apologized as he slid the shotgun under the stall door. Meanwhile, outside the bathroom, gunfire had echoed down the halls. Students ran for their lives, but not everyone ran away. Two men ran toward the sound, Principal Greg Johnson and Assistant Principal Andy McGill. Driven by heart, they charged into danger, determined to protect their students. They reached the bathroom where Ely was standing with his gun nearby, and in a moment of brave, controlled action, the two men subdued him and secured the weapon before he could harm anyone else. By the time police arrived, they found the shooter already restrained, held down by Principal Johnson with adrenaline still pulsing through the room. Logan was rushed to the hospital as he underwent emergency surgery and miraculously survived. Doctors couldn't remove all the pellets. Around 100 remain in his body to this day, a permanent reminder of the moment everything changed. Ely Cerna was later sentenced to 23.5 years in prison for attempted murder and inducing panic. 13-year-old kid versus Jason.
Seaman threw a basketball at him as a diversion, then ran toward the bullets, knocking the gun from his hands and tackling the shooter to the ground.
May 25, 2018, in Noblesville, Indiana, the morning sun rose gently over the quiet town of Noblesville. It was a day like any other at Noblesville West Middle School. In science class, the second period had just begun. Students sharpened pencils and tried not to think too hard about the weekend still hours away. Among them sat 13-year-old Ella Whistler, a bright student with a kind smile. Near her stood Mr. Jason Seaman, a science teacher with a commanding presence, not just from his height or his past as a college football lineman, but from the quiet, steady way he carried himself. He had traded shoulder pads for a whiteboard, but his protective instinct had never left. At exactly 9:06 a.m., a fellow student, also just 13 years old, walked back into the classroom after asking to be excused. He seemed calm, almost casual, but beneath his sweatshirt was a .22 caliber handgun, and in his mind, a cold plan he had crafted in secret, even recording a video the night before, declaring his violent intentions. Then, he opened fire as students ducked under desks. His first shots hit Seaman, 3 bullets fast and brutal, one tearing into his hip, another his abdomen, the last into his forearm. But Jason didn't fall. Wounded and bleeding, he reached for the only thing within arm's reach, a basketball. He hurled it at the shooter. A split-second distraction was enough for the shooter to fumble while trying to switch weapons. That was his mistake. Jason saw his moment and charged as he tackled the gunman, driving him to the ground. At that moment, he wasn't a teacher. He was a shield between danger and his students. As he wrestled the weapon away, he instructed the students to run away. Students fled the classroom with their feet pounding against the tile. At the same time, across town, rumors of a second threat triggered a lockdown at Noblesville High School as police swarmed the area. Back in the science room, a school resource officer arrived and saw the already subdued shooter. He was on the ground, disarmed, restrained, and taken into custody. Since the shooter was only 13 at the time of the crime, Indiana law prohibited trying him as an adult. Instead, he was tried in juvenile court. In November 2018, the judge found him responsible for 11 counts, including attempted murder, aggravated battery, and possession of a firearm on school property. In December 2018, the shooter was sentenced to the maximum punishment allowed under juvenile law, confinement in a juvenile detention facility until his 21st birthday. Kipland Kinkle.
According to reports, got up on a table to shoot at students. When he tried to switch guns, that's when students tackled him and forced him to stop.
May 21st, 1998, in Springfield, Oregon, the morning light spread across the quiet town of Springfield as students filtered into Thurston High School, unaware that history was about to burn its name into their hallways. 17-year-old Jacob Riker was just another face in the crowd that day until everything changed. The day before the incident, Kipland Kinkle, a 15-year-old freshman, was misbehaving as his parents had noticed the signs of disturbing behavior, growing paranoia, and angry outbursts. They sought professional help, tried to intervene, but the darkness inside their son was deeper than they knew. On the night of May 20th, Kip's turmoil exploded. In a moment of terrifying clarity, he walked up behind his father and pulled the trigger. Later that evening, when his mother returned home, he met her in the garage and shot her multiple times, cold. Then, Kip slept in the same house with their bodies. The following day, Kip got into his mother's car and drove to school. Beneath his trench coat, he hid 2 handguns, a semi-automatic rifle, a knife, and over 1,000 rounds of ammunition. He had been suspended the day before for bringing a stolen loaded gun to school. No one expected to see him on campus again, but there he was, pushing through the school's front doors with murder on his mind. As students laughed and joked in the cafeteria, Kip entered, and everywhere was ripped apart by the sound of gunfire. Panic exploded as Kip began firing into the crowd, methodically, emotionlessly. Bullets tore through tables and backpacks, bodies fell, lives shattered in an instant. On the floor, bleeding students crawled for safety. But Jacob Riker didn't run. He watched and waited with his heart pounding in his ears, waiting for the shooter to reload. Then he moved. With a rush of adrenaline and purpose, Jacob surged forward. He closed the distance in seconds and tackled Kip, tearing the rifle from his hands. The two hit the ground hard, locked in a violent struggle. But Kip wasn't done. He had 2 pistols. He pulled one free and fired point blank into Jacob's chest. 6 more students joined in as they overwhelmed Kip, pinned him to the ground, and didn't let go until the police stormed in. The cafeteria was in a mess as 2 students, Ben Walker and Mikhail Nikola, didn't make it, but the death toll could have been far higher. 26 others were wounded, many critically, and still, because of Jacob Riker's split-second decision to charge into gunfire, many lives were spared. As for Kip Kinkel, he was arrested, diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia, and later sentenced to 111 years in prison without parole for 4 counts of murder and 26 counts of attempted murder. In the years that followed, the town of Springfield did what communities must do in the wake of horror. They came together and built a permanent memorial outside Thurston High School, a place with names carved into stone of memory. 12-year-old versus Krista Gnating.
Really, the big hero of the day today is a teacher who was able to disarm the girl who had the gun and hold her down until police got there.
Are you the shooter? And she just watched me, and I just walked up to her, and I put my hand over her hand, and I just slowly pulled the gun.
May 6, 2021. In Rigby, Idaho, it was a typical Thursday morning at Rigby Middle School, with backpacks slung over shoulders and teachers reviewing lesson plans. At 8:55 a.m., a 12-year-old girl, dressed in black and wearing a surgical mask, walked silently through the corridor. Hidden in her backpack was a semi-automatic pistol, which she unleashed a few minutes later. The first shot sounded like construction, which some students barely noticed. But when the second and third shots rang out, reality hit them. Students screamed as teachers slammed classroom doors shut and lockdown protocols clicked into place. But down the hall, someone had already been hit. Jim Wilson, the school's custodian, had been cleaning nearby when he turned toward the sound. The shooter raised the gun. A shot tore through his leg, sending him stumbling, bleeding, toward the counseling office. Staff rushed to his aid as the nightmare continued. In another part of the school, Krista Gnating, a math teacher, had just heard the gunfire. Her instinct kicked in as she pushed her students into lockdown, got them to safety. But she didn't stop there. While others stayed hidden, rightfully afraid, Krista stepped out as she walked into the hallway, alone. Then she saw her, a little girl, holding a gun with trembling hands, a child in crisis, lost in a moment of irreversible consequence. Krista didn't raise her voice, but moved slowly, deliberately, toward the girl. She spoke softly, not like a teacher confronting a threat, but like a human reaching for another lost soul. And she did something extraordinary. She gently placed her hand over the girl's, took the gun, and then, just as gently, pulled her into an embrace. She hugged her, whispered to her, and held her until the police arrived.
Are you the shooter? And she just watched me, and I just walked up to her, and I put my hand over her hand, and I just slowly pulled the gun.
In that hallway, Krista didn't just disarm a shooter, she saved a child and stopped a tragedy before it could escalate. Meanwhile, 3 people were injured, Jim Wilson and 2 students. As the investigation unfolded, authorities discovered that the girl had brought the pistol from home, having taken it from her parents without their knowledge. Her motives, while never fully disclosed to the public, were believed to be rooted in deep emotional distress and mental health struggles. Because of her age, the shooter could not be tried as an adult under Idaho law. She was instead charged as a juvenile with 3 counts of attempted murder and multiple weapons charges. In late 2021, a judge ruled that the girl would remain in the custody of the Idaho Department of Juvenile Corrections until her 19th birthday, the maximum sentence allowable under juvenile jurisdiction.